All right, welcome to our Ask the Expert event. Today is Monday, November 25th, 2024. I'm David Johnson. I am officially the product owner at SolidWP, but today I'm just stepping into the amazingly huge shoes of Nathan Ingram, who is not able to join us, and I'll be hosting today, and we're going to be talking with Timothy Jacobs. Timothy's been a frequent guest here on events in the past here with Solid Academy. But if you're new to SolidWP or Solid Academy, let's tell you a little bit about what Timothy does. He is our lead developer at SolidWP. So he is very, very much involved in products like Solid Security, which is available absolutely free in the WordPress.org plugin directory. And also Solid Security Pro, which is something that we make available to those folks who want to buy a little bit of extra help. Timothy is also a mastermind behind many of the other things that you have heard about from SolidWP, including Backups NextGen, which recently launched a few weeks ago. And it is a fantastic cloud-first,
Almost 6
cloud-native.
weeks ago at this point.
I know, it still
We're more
feels
than a
very
month in.
recent. I know, yeah. And we get more and more sites being backed up on Solid Backups NextGen every single day. So we're glad you're here. Today is going to be all about answering questions. You did have a chance to submit questions, and we have those here for those that did supply a question when you registered for this event. We're excited about getting into those questions, but I want to mention here two things. One is, as you can see, we do have the chat going. Please say hello in the chat. We've been greeting folks here already just before we got officially started. But if you have a question, please be sure to put your question in the Q&A box. So chats go in the chat box, questions go in the Q&A box, and then that way we will have a chance to hear from you about what you would like to know, and we'll get those questions tackled. I also just want to mention, I didn't get the Patch Stack logo on here, but I'm really excited about this event. This is happening
It's right there on his
tomorrow.
shirt.
It is. It's very
Just got
small.
to zoom in.
Yeah, exactly. I love the fact that we have pieces of Solid Security that are powered by PatchStack. PatchStack is an amazing platform. And if you've never dived into what virtual patches are all about, how they protect you even when you sleep from vulnerabilities that might be there without you knowing about them in your themes or plugins or even WordPress core potentially. Tomorrow's going to be a great event. Nathan Ingram will be hosting that. It is absolutely free, and you can sign up on the Solid Academy website if you haven't already registered for that. Oliver is the CEO. Oliver Sild is his name, and I've met Oliver on a couple of occasions. Fantastic human being. He's the founder and CEO of PatchStack, a fantastic organization. So that's going to be a great event tomorrow with Nathan and Oliver. Also, just want to mention the usual plugin roundup will be happening on December 3rd at 1 p.m. Central, and as well as the best of the plugin roundup from June through December. That's going to happen next week on December 4th at 1 p.m. Central. Make sure you're signed up for those and joining those fantastic upcoming events. I will say office hours is likely not happening this week because of the Thanksgiving holiday in the U.S. I'm pretty sure that Nathan is not going to step away from the turkey dinner and run office hours this week, but it'll be back on the usual time next week. So be sure to take advantage of those. That is a premium event for those who are members of Solid Academy. And I want to mention you get Solid Academy Premium free with any Solid Suite membership. They start as low as $199 a year, but there are also some exciting things happening for Black Friday and Cyber Monday. And so if you're not yet taking advantage of the tremendous opportunity to use all the great resources in Solid Academy Premium, then be sure to check out what we have on offer starting tomorrow from SolidWP's stellar sale. It's not the stellar sale. That already happened. It was a few months ago. Black Friday sale. And there are some fun ways for you to get access to Solid Academy absolutely free. There's a bunch of other really great stuff happening as well. So this is a great time of year to get yourself all set up with Solid WP products. So Timothy, I'm excited to have you here. You do more than just serve as the lead engineer for the Solid WP team, though. You are a WordPress core committer as well, and you have an involvement in a community, local meetup, something in New York City. Is that right?
Yeah. So WPNYC is our meetup group. Strange post-COVID, but
Yeah.
figuring all those things out. You can find me at a WordCamp that is on the East Coast. Not sure when the next one that's gonna be. I was at Montclair a couple of months ago. But yeah, if
Yeah.
you're in the area, Montclair is kind of our new New York City meetup, so to speak. It's right over the
Ah,
river.
I
Uh,
see. I see. Yeah, I'm involved in the community here in Southwest Florida. I'm involved in the Tampa meetup. We have a Sarasota meetup, but honestly, meetings have not been happening much since COVID. It's always it's part of that sort of weird uh, kind of we got to kick all this stuff back off phase. But anyway, for today, I want to start with a question that came in from Gerd. He was asking, he or she actually, they were asking. I don't know Gerd's gender, so I don't want to make any assumptions there. But Gerd, in the process of signing up for this event, asked about sort of the state of WordPress. You know, can you talk a little bit, Timothy, to like what is going on right now in terms of, you know, exploits, the universe of WordPress security? Can you bring us kind of up to the moment as a way to
yeah,
kind of get started?
Yeah, so we're going to kind of give an overview of where WordPress security is at, share a couple of cool stats from some of our friends, Thomas, some others. You'll get a little bit of a preview about what you can see much more details about with Oliver next week about Patch Stack. And yeah, we're going to talk about, I guess, the state of WordPress security. The state of WordPress in general, more interesting. State of WordPress security, though, is where we're going to leave it for this little bit of the thing. And yeah, if you have any questions about what I'm specifically talking about, feel free to throw them in the chat. I'll try and get to them as I go. We might
Yeah, throw
pop
them in
into
the
some of them
QA
at
if
the
you would.
end.
The Q&A. I will keep an eye on the Q&A here. We've already got a few coming in, so I want to just say a quick thank you to several folks who are submitting questions. And we've also got Sarah who's helping us. She's compiled some questions that have also come in from late registration. So we'll get to those questions as well. But let's Timothy, why don't we let you take it away? And you listening, please, if you have a question for Timothy, drop it in the Q&A, and we'll let you take it away for now, Timothy, and give us an update.
Cool. So yeah, we're going to be talking about how you can reduce your risk to nearly zero using solid security. And so we're going to kind of take an overview of a couple of different attack types in WordPress and how we're seeing those around. And the first one that I want to talk about is through our front door, which is all about login security. And so login security is, it's kind of fundamental, right? If you have a weak password, it means that attackers might be able to brute force their way into your website. And if you're using, maybe you've got a really strong password that you spent a lot of time thinking up and committing to memory, but you lose that really strong password on, 10, 20, 30, 100 different websites. That's not good either. That can lead to an attack called a credential stuffing attack, where attackers basically say, oh, look at this breach. This website out here, they got hacked. All of their passwords got leaked. Let's just try these passwords everywhere we could try a password. And so protecting your front door is really important. I think that's where people often kind of stop thinking about this, but you also want to think about the reputational damage around an attacked site. Maybe your password on your WordPress site is super secure, but what about your customers' passwords on their site? So it's not just about administrators. You can see this in the news. This is an excerpt from 23andMe, where it's described as a threat actor that exposed DNA data, just kind of important, for 7 million users. What's interesting here, though, and now 23andMe is a little bit at fault, but what actually happened was passwords were cracked. It wasn't that there was a, dump of all of 23andMe's data. They left some data unsecured somewhere out there. It was people's user accounts that got compromised. And so they are partially responsible. And we'll talk about how 23andMe and how you could have prevented this attack from your website. And you need to give them some incentive, because oftentimes your users are just going to make the easy choice. They're just saying, oh, this site let me log in with a password. Sure, I'm storing my credit card details so it can make purchases on their online shop. But if they said password was a good enough password, then it's good enough for me. And so mandating security best practices really is your responsibility. And we can see this play out in the news time and time again. According to our friends, Thomas over at We Watch Your Website, this kind of through the front door attack, it makes up about 7.2% of the attacks that he saw over the past year. And so this is a small number. And what I think that means is that, hey, people are doing a better job now at keeping their site secure, at keeping their passwords good. We know this is a thing. I would like to see this number drop to close to 0, though. It is kind of surprising that still there are this many folks in some ways that are using insecure passwords and their login pages are just getting brute forced. So if you are to prevent yourself from being in that 7.2%, what can you do about it? Well, there are a couple of features in Solid Security that you can use. One is just enabling brute force protection. This prevents attackers from trying hundreds or thousands of passwords before you even notice that your site has been compromised. You should require strong passwords. This uses WordPress's strength meter, which by default in WordPress, you can kind of get by with just checking the I know this is a weak password button. But if you enable the require strong passwords feature in Solid Security, you're forced to give us a strong password. You can also prevent that credential stuffing attack that I talked about a little bit earlier using the Prevent Breached Passwords. It's a partnership with a great organization that you might have seen in the news called Have I Been Pwned? And you can also slow down bots with CAPTCHAs, using Cloudflare Turnstile, reCAPTCHA, or HCAPTCHA. Another way that you can approach this is with two-factor. Two-factor is one of the strongest ways that we have to prevent attacks on your accounts. If you want, you can use user groups functionality in Solid Security Pros to limit and enforce two-factor for the privileged users. So you want to make sure that, hey, all administrators on your account are set up in using two-factor. You can just check one box. They're forced to do it. You don't need to send pesky email reminders saying, hey, can you please set up two-factor? I noticed you haven't done it. The next time they log into WordPress, they'll be forced to. And what we built a long time ago when we launched this feature was an automatic onboarding flow so that users could get set up with this process. They're explained what's happening, what they need to do, hopefully without your intervening. And this is a bit of data from Google that shows how effective account takeover attacks can be prevented using two-factor. In some senses, it's 100%, 99% of attacks that they saw were prevented. If someone is coming after you specifically, they saw 90% of attacks being generated. So I think two-factor does and continues to be a very strong way to help protect your WordPress site. You should also use passwords login. This is a whole talk in and of itself. It's something we've talked about in the Academy before. You can check it out over on academy.solidwp.com. In my talk about Let's Kill the Password and learn how you can use passwordless login to make all of those more enhanced login page practices easier for you to use and easier for your clients to use. You can kind of see an example of this here. This is using passkeys. I get to type in my email, hit the use passkey button. It does a nice little Face ID scan, and I'm logged into my site. This lets you skip that password that was really complex and hard to remember and hard to implement. It lets you skip two-factor, which can be a little bit of a time friction. And it gives you a kind of one-click login experience, particularly on devices with Touch ID sensors and Face ID sensors. Now, what about access management? So it's easy when you're setting up a site to just make everyone an administrator. The administrator role is right there. It's in the dropdown, but I would consider not making everyone an administrator. Figure out what is the least access that this user needs. Also keep in mind that responsibilities change. So someone might need something today, but they might switch brands, they might switch their role, and they no longer need that access. Make sure you have a plan in place to demote them when they no longer need this. You should also really keep track of what accounts you give folks. You might be working at a small agency. You have hundreds and hundreds of client sites that you manage, and you might have a new employee that you onboard onto all of them. Make sure you have an offboarding process so that they no longer have access to all of those websites. Luckily, WordPress gives us some helpful features here. We have roles. So, we talked about administrator role being right there, but oftentimes you can get away with an editor or even an author. There's also plugins like User Role Editor to let you design your own permission scheme that keeps users just having the minimum functionality that they need. We also have a great feature in Solid Security for this called privilege escalation. This lets you say, hey, I need to give this user access to administrator functionality or editor functionality, but they only need it to make a couple of changes. You can, always just say, okay, I'm going to bump them up to administrator, and then I'll remind myself to come back a few weeks later and just remove it. Or you can use privilege escalation to say, hey, you get this functionality for a couple of days, and then Solid Security will make sure that they're back to their normal privileges when they're done. We also have a great scan that's built in the plugin for checking for inactive users. So, if you have someone who has administrator access to their site, but they haven't logged in the 30 days, maybe they don't need that administrator access anymore. Consider demoting them to an author role and using privilege escalation if they do have the times when they need to make a more advanced change. Here's something that we don't directly help with, but I think is a general best practice, which is just centrally document when you give folks access to things in one place. You don't want to be thinking, oh, do they have access to my Twitter account and my Blue Sky account and to this banking integration? Make sure you list it down when you're giving it. It makes offboarding so much simpler. So that's the front door. Let's talk about the back door. And that's vulnerable software. From last year, we saw nearly 6,000 issues of vulnerabilities in WordPress plugins and themes. As you can see here, the mass majority of it is in plugins. WordPress core having super critical vulnerabilities is not the thing that it used to be of, a decade prior. What we really see now is plugins with vulnerabilities. And again, according to Thomas, this made up nearly 33% of hacks in 2023. Vulnerable software can be tricky to understand. There's lots of just, this plugin has a vulnerability, but what does that actually mean for my site? And so this means kind of acknowledging that, hey, a remote code execution attack where an attacker is able to just run arbitrary code in your site that can make it do anything is not the same as a self-XSS attack where, if you do something wrong as the administrator, you could kind of make a mistake. Don't, copy and paste untrusted content into your WordPress site, that type of thing. And so the way we kind of document this in the industry is using things called CVSS scores. And these range from a 0 to a 10 to indicate how severe this issue is. And what it basically means is that, hey, a 9.8 is not the same as a 3.0. So you can also combine this with some knowledgeable folks in the industry from PatchStack. PatchStack takes those numbers that can be a little bit vague and turns them into a priority for you. So you can say, hey, these are the issues that you need to address now. These are ones that, you can get to a bit later. So when you're scheduling your WordPress updates, you know what to do. And if you see a critical vulnerability come in with a high priority, hey, we can't just wait until our scheduled update time every 2 weeks. We need to do this one today. We can kind of see an example of this in PatchStack's directory here. This is about the WP Forms plugin, which had a vulnerability earlier this year. You can see that there's a high severity on it, but it's a medium priority. It hasn't been known to be exploited yet, so you should patch this within 7 days. What we find running our site scanner is that about 45% of websites have vulnerable software on them. So this is a thing that is affecting a lot of sites. If you haven't scanned your site for vulnerable software recently, you might be surprised to know that there is a vulnerability there, sometimes in plugins which are totally up to date. So what can you do about this? Well, you can install Solid Security. It tracks the vulnerabilities that are affecting your site. It'll run multiple site scans a day to find new vulnerabilities, and it'll give you recommendations on how to resolve the issue. We also have what I think is very cool, a historical view of vulnerabilities. So if you've got a WordPress site that you've been using Solid Security Pro on for a year at this point since our rebrand, you can see all of the vulnerabilities that your site has gone through and resolved over the past 12 months. It's in some ways a sobering look. You can see here that kind of detailed view where we show you, hey, here are the things that you need to do to resolve this vulnerability. This is one with WooCommerce, telling you that, hey, we can update this plugin to resolve that vulnerability, but it's also been patched automatically because I'm a Solid Security Pro user. So if this dropped on me and I was on vacation, it was Thanksgiving Day, I would be protected for those hours before I could get to my computer and make this update. Here's another example with Ninja Forms. Ninja Forms in this vulnerability didn't have a patch available. And so it means that, hey, this is something that we needed to update. And you can see here that Solid Security detected that update and logged it for us and says, hey, we updated this plugin. It's good. Virtual patching, which I kind of alluded to, is this great feature that you'll learn more about tomorrow with Oliver's talk. The big thing to keep in mind here is that, hey, a site can be compromised these days within hours of a vulnerability being published. We see attackers leap on new vulnerability reports and start right away developing an exploit kit. So, if you're on vacation, if you sleep, this might be something that you actually need to consider because you're not available 24/7. Unless you have a global team that is looking across every single website that you manage constantly, it's very easy to find yourself in a position where a critical vulnerability is published, attackers are starting to exploit it, and it's 3 a.m. for you. You're still napping. There were V patches that PatchStack published over the past year, and PatchStack correlates and publishes data every year. I think it's in February is when they do, I think, their big report. And what they found from that report at the time was that about 25% of their virtual patches were covering you when there was no official fix. So there wasn't even a mechanism if you were able to say, hey, you know what, I am on it 24/7. Or maybe you're one of the folks who auto updates every single plugin. And you're just saying, hey, auto update the plugin for me. That'll catch the vulnerabilities. But 25% of the patches that Patch Stack published last year, there just wasn't a fix updatable to yet. So you had to, either have a virtual patch or deactivate the plugin. Patch Stack is really different in how it works. It deploys targeted firewall rules that actually block the attacks that your site is vulnerable to. So it's not just saying, hey, there's a million things out here that could be affecting your WordPress site. It's saying, no, these are the things that are affecting your WordPress site. And they're tailored rules that deploy to actually fix the things that, hey, if you weren't paying attention to, could compromise your website. It is still important to note, though, that patches are a mitigation. That's something we call that, hey, this isn't 100% fixing the issue, but it's mitigating the issue to prevent it from being exploited by attackers. But we still want to update our software. We don't want to be in a situation where we have 300 virtual patches running on our site because we set up our WordPress site, 3 years ago, and we just said, hey, it's working here. Why update? No, you still want to update your sites. So again, you can kind of see a big example of that here. This is a virtual patch that was applied automatically from Patch Stack. You can see it over here, and you can see it in our firewall screen as well. It'll show you down, hey, here are the list of virtual patches that are active on your site right now. And you can even see in the logs, you can see when those attacks are actually prevented. What about updates in general, though? You still need to have a plan here. So you should schedule a time for updates. Don't just make this a, hey, the client requested that I make a change to the homepage. Oh, there's some plugins to update. You should have a plan to make sure that you're updating those plugins. You should prioritize those high severity issues. Don't just say, hey, there's a couple of low severity issues with a plugin. We have to do a whole bunch of testing. Maybe you need to do those less frequently, but when there are high severity issues, you need to make sure that you're applying those right away. Hosts like Nexus, they also help provide automatic updates in a more safe way by pairing it with a visual regression test. This is something you can set up yourself as well, but it's a really cool feature in some managed hosts like Nexus that'll say, hey, we tried out this update and it didn't make any broken changes to your website. So we deployed it for you and you don't need to think about it. You can also use Solid Central to apply updates across all of your sites in one click. So you don't need to say, hey, if I want to apply updates when WooCommerce has an issue, I have to log into 150 WordPress websites that I manage. You can do it all in one click, and Solid Central will take care of it for you. We also have a really cool feature in Solid Security that I recommend. I personally am a fan of auto updates, but I know not everyone is a fan of auto updates for everything. So instead, you can use this feature that will only automatically update a plugin if that automatic update is fixing a vulnerability. And the second that we see that update in WordPress, we update that plugin for you. And so that's a great way to kind of give you that balance of, hey, I don't want to enable automatic updates for everything, but if it's a security fix, I trust that the plugin developers aren't also including a massive change to the user interface that's going to, make my clients upset. So those are, through the front door with our account security, through the back door with our vulnerable plugins or vulnerable themes. But there's also a cool attack which just happens right under our nose. And that's this session stealing attack. So this is when malware is installed on your device and steals your cookies. Cookies are the things that tell WordPress, hey, this is who I am. I'm an administrator, named this user, and I have the permission to do all these different things. And what attackers do is when they have malware installed on your device, they now steal your cookies from your browser and they send them off over to a botnet or they're sold on to further attackers. And those cookies then let them say, hey, I'm the administrator on this WordPress site. You already authenticated me. You might not have any vulnerable plugins, but I have this cookie that says I am you. And that lets me do whatever I need to do. And it bypasses those protections like brute force or two-factor authentication. This was kind of staggering when Thomas published these numbers, is that 60% of hacks that he saw were through these compromises, where stolen cookies were just showing up in the data that were being stolen from the hacker. You could see them being exfiltrated and see them being used, which is a crazy high number. So what do we do about this kind of attack that's happening under our nose? Well, the first thing is keep your computer secure. If your device hasn't been compromised, well, then you don't have anything to worry about here. But You, as the more techie, up-to-date person who's running a firewall on your devices and never clicks on untrusted links, you probably have a client. And is your client applying those same security best practices to you? As you, I wouldn't be 100% confident knowing some of the clients that I've worked in the past. So what are some things that you can recommend to them? Well, you can recommend to your clients not to log in to their WordPress sites on public or shared devices. Do you really need to log in at the library? Do you really need to use the business center computer at that hotel that you're staying at? Or is this something that can wait or should maybe happen on your own computer? You can also implement additional controls on sessions. And this is a thing that Solid Security Pro can help you with. And that's in our feature called Trusted Devices. This is something that we actually launched like 5 or 6 years ago or so. And when Thomas published our data, we were like, oh, this is really cool. We've been preventing against this attack for years. What Trusted Devices does, it alerts you to whenever a user logs into your WordPress website from a new device. You can see an example of this in the UI over here. We notice an unrecognized login from a different device, and it gives us options here. This means that, hey, that user has stolen that session cookie, logged in from somewhere else. They're now in our WordPress dashboard. What do we do about it? And so from here, I can say, nope, secure my account. It'll walk you through a process to reset your password because it means it might have been compromised. Or you can say, hey, this was me. I'm actually taking a vacation. I'm in a hotel room. That's me. That's my IP address. That's my geolocation. That's all good. And then Trusted Devices won't warn you about it anymore. We do have a great feature there, though, which is called restricting capabilities. So we don't want to just automatically lock someone out whenever they're coming in from a new location, because it might be disruptive to your flow if you actually are moving about, or maybe you work from coffee shops, things like that. But what restrict capabilities lets us do is say, hey, this is a login that we don't entirely trust. They're on a new device. They suddenly teleported from New York to California. That doesn't seem very likely. So instead, that user will operate in a restricted session where they don't have permission to do the most advanced things. They can, browse around, look at the posts, do some writing, but they can't install a new plugin. They can't create a new administrator user for themselves. We also then have session hijacking protection, which will go a little bit step further and just say, hey, we noticed you teleported. That's it. We're killing this login session entirely, and you'll be forced to log in again. And that's when you'll, get an email, get the alert in WPM, and that, hey, there's a new user on your site from a new location. There's something you should do about it. Again, though, this all kind of boils down to the weakest link, which is, if you have one administrator account with a weak password, an attacker can find that one and compromise it. Or if you have one unpatched plugin with a critical security issue, that's it. We often kind of say that, hey, as the folks defending our sites, we have to catch everything every time. An attacker only has to be successful once. So that means we always have to be on top of what we're doing, on top of those administrator accounts, on top of our plugins, and stay vigilant. And so what that means is use every tool available to you.
Love it. Love it. Awesome. Thank you, Timothy, for walking us through the sort of state of the WordPress security world. We won't steal the state of the word title, because that's not really, that's not
No.
what's happening there
Coming
at all.
up in a couple of weeks, right? I think
Absolutely.
it's in Tokyo.
I was going to say you have
Check
to
it
be
out.
awake at a strange hour if you're in the Western
If
Hemisphere.
you're in this webinar, it might be a strange hour for you.
Yeah, exactly. And so we did have a couple of questions that have come in. One is kind of related here, and I want to just kind
Yeah.
of bring it up. Actually, there were two that are kind of similar, I think, questions. Jessica asked about IP addresses, and specifically static or dedicated IPs. And there was a question that had been submitted previously by someone who I think might be in a slightly similar situation. So I'm going to start with a question from Stephanie, who said, my PC always changes my IP address. I confirm solid security every time I log in after checking under the settings that it's me. And once, when I was not aware of this change, I chose that my installation should remember me, but this is not possible as my IP changes. So it's essentially Stephanie is asking about what happens. Is there a way to sort of handle the IP address changing? Do you have any tips or workarounds? Obviously, with trusted devices and the configuration that you just mentioned, Timothy, there's some things that can be done. But what would you suggest to somebody who does not end up with the same IP all the time?
Yeah. So
Maybe
the
from
big thing
home
that
or
we
office.
did to kind of touch on this issue is trusted devices doesn't have to just be based off of your IP. So we integrate with geolocation providers. MaxMind is a free option, and there's also a pro version of MaxMind that I would recommend. It's more accurate. And that's our way to kind of bridge this gap. So if it's just identifying, hey, has this person moved based off of their IP address? We just say, hey, is that different? Well, then it's a different session. You're going to have to log in again. But if the geolocation says, hey, you're still in New York and you're still in New York again, we give that a higher trust score. And so you're going to be less likely to be forced into that option. So that's something that you can enable in solid security settings. You go over to the geolocation and search for that. You can add those in. You can either, again, purchase and set up an account with MaxMind, or you can do a free MaxMind offering as well. You do need to create an account, I think, at this point, both times. But that is exactly kind of how we want to handle that. The other thing you can consider, right, is that if you're running a business out of your home, it might be worth, talking to your ISP to see if they have a business tier. Oftentimes those come with a static IP address, which can be really helpful. And so then you can have on your home network a static IP. You can set up lots of times the better router systems, which are kind of like how you get onto the internet, have a VPN option where you can kind of quote teleport quote back to your home computer. So if you're also on the road, you can say, hey, I'm going to route all of my traffic through my home connection. My home connection is, a top tier business line for my internet service provider. And then that problem kind of goes away. It just appears as if you're always operating from home. So that's something that I make use of when I travel a lot, is to be able to just make sure, hey, I have a lot of protections that are set up that think I'm always here. So, let's pretend I'm here.
Very good. And then Jessica's question was slightly different, so I want to just kind of jump into what Jessica had to say. By the way, I did drop a link in if you're wondering how to use a geolocation item that Timothy mentioned. I dropped a link into the support article about Solid Security's geolocation tool, so you can see a little bit more detail how to set that up. But Jessica's question was asking about, do you recommend dedicated or static IPs despite more than one session being allowed with most providers? So I think that what Jessica's trying to get to here is related. Jessica says, I use two-factor authentication and login security, but additional layer with physical security keys. So I'm guessing like a little YubiKey, for example, is probably what is being referred to there. But I had a bad experience with plugins. What more can we do to secure on the application layer, meaning WordPress?
Yeah, so I think those are probably two separate questions.
I think so too, yeah.
Jessica, if you're talking about, or maybe you can clarify, if you mean your server using a dedicated IP address, this is a thing that some more advanced hosting providers give you. These days, I think it's less important. So what I recommend basically for all WordPress sites is to live behind Cloudflare. And when you configure Cloudflare, most hosting providers these days will also give you what's called a CNAME record. And that CNAME record should automatically update if your server IP address changes. And I think that's a just better way of handling this these days. You can, if you need additional security protections, let's say, hey, you need to make sure that all of your requests from your WordPress website are coming from a particular IP, then you can, grab a managed dedicated IP address. Usually most providers charge extra for that. But I think these days it's not super important. And oftentimes with more modern hosting, a dedicated IP is almost hard to guarantee because they might be moving your site around depending on traffic and things like that. So yeah, if you're talking about specifically dedicated or static IPs for your server, that'd be my recommendation there. If you're talking about it on your home network, kind of what I mentioned a couple of minutes ago. For your WordPress WP admin, I think two-factor is great. Adding additional login security protections like brute force protections is great as well. If you're using a YubiKey, you're ahead of the game. I'd recommend trying out passwordless login with passkeys. This can put you in a situation where you never have to type in your password. You can then use that security key to, say, hey, this is definitely me. And Solid Security supports passkeys and passwordless login using a YubiKey. I have one over here that I use all the time. So yeah, I would highly recommend combining all those things together.
Yeah, very good. I also have a YubiKey sitting right here. So fantastic tool.
They're handy.
And yeah, I think we've addressed that. But Jessica, if you were asking something slightly different, please drop in and any clarifying information that you want in the Q&A, and then we'll circle back to that to make sure that we've answered. I think Timothy answered both possible ways that you were asking the.
There might be a secret third.
Exactly right. Yeah. So let's make sure if if you still have a question about that, please let us know. Jeffrey asked, VPNs advertise being secure. Does using a VPN full time make me more secure? I think this is a little bit of a loaded question, but it's a fun one, and it kind of relates here.
Yeah. So my recommendation, well, VPN things come into a couple of different forms. We can't go for hours and hours on this, but
Right.
I'd say it depends on what you're trying to do. So sometimes, and you'll see this in a lot of the advertising for VPNs, which is, hey, if you want to, access UK Netflix, then you can do that using our VPN, and that's great. And so that can still be, helpful if that's what you're trying to do. Oftentimes, I think you're better off using a VPN that brings you back to your home network when you're traveling, because kind of one of the more classic reasons why we used VPNs is saying, hey, we're accessing so many websites that are not HTTPS. All that traffic is in plain text. So it would be great to be behind a VPN when I'm at an internet cafe. But this is just less and less the case. So it's more about, hey, can we just make sure that all my traffic is going through the same place with hopefully an ISP I trust? Because the other side of using a VPN is that, we've seen this in the past. Some ISPs automatically try and inject content and ads into your website, or they might be saying, hey, we're going to not let you go here and not let you go there. And so that's an additional way that a VPN can protect you. And so if your home ISP isn't one that gives you the freedom, I guess you could say, that you want, then, a VPN that lets you transmit yourself to a different location can be helpful. There are also now Safari, if you are, for instance, a Mac OS user, automatically kind of comes with a VPN built in. It'll just proxy all of your Safari traffic through Apple servers if that's something that you want to do. But yeah, you have options out there, but I don't think a VPN just kind of like inherently makes you more secure, which is kind of what the advertising leads you to believe. But that doesn't mean that it is an unhelpful tool by any means. It is something that can definitely help. But if your admin password is still admin, VPN isn't going to help you.
It's true. It's true. It's all about using the right tool for the job. I will say I have a friend who spun up. There are lots of open source VPN
Mm-hmm.
solutions, and so you can spin up a VPS and run a self-hosted VPN that only you connect to, and the VPN would allow you to authenticate to a server with a fixed IP address. You can get a dedicated IP, and then your VPN in turn, if you're as long as you're connected to that VPN, when you connect to your WordPress site, then it doesn't really matter where you are, but you have teleported essentially, like you were just saying, Timothy, back to your home address. In this case, you, instead of a home address, though, you've teleported to a data center somewhere with a fixed IP address on that VPS.
Yeah.
So VPS here meaning virtual private server. I realize we use these acronyms, VPN, VPS, they're very similar. So a
Very
virtual
similar,
private
but
server.
very different.
Yeah, but very, very different ideas. So there are lots of creative ways to solve some of those issues. And VPNs are great. I use one frequently, especially when I'm out and about. But it's like you said, Timothy, it often doesn't protect us as much today as it did back before
Yeah, the internet has
HTTPS
gotten more
everywhere.
secure, right? So
Yeah.
like these days, basically every site is behind HTTPS. But that definitely wasn't the case a decade ago.
Yeah, yeah, very much true. All right, so we'll keep an eye out for additional new questions. We've got some more that have come in, and I appreciate those that have come in through the Q&A box. If you have a question for Timothy, we have about 20 minutes left before we wrap for today, so we have room for some more questions. And I wanted to mention one, Timothy, that came in from Edie. I actually have handy, in case we want to look at it. I have handy a demo of Solid Central that we can look at as we respond to this. Uh,
Yeah.
but but Edie asked, I would like to see when I update a plugin from the WordPress backend that it would also show in the Solid Central timeline. And this is actually related to a question about reports. Gene sent a question about reports that said, "Hey, those reports in Solid Central, they only seem to include the updates from version management or automatic updates. Is there a way to have all the updates included in the report?" So those are slightly different questions, but they relate to each other with respect to how we think about what we can see in
Yeah, so
Solid
Edie, I would say
Central.
I agree with you, which is that would be very cool. I agree with you so much that it is something that we are planning on doing. I'm not going to say it's going to happen tomorrow, but it is on our short-term list of things we want to do. You're sharing your whole screen, David.
Oh, that
Um,
is not what I want to do. Thank you.
but absolutely, one of the things that we're planning is so that, hey, when you make an update in WP admin, that it gets reflected over in Central. It's not as easy as you might think. We want to make sure that, hey, if you update it from Solid Central, that also tells WordPress to update the plugin, and we don't want it to show up twice in your timeline. So there's some things that we have to do to think about it, but it is absolutely something on our list, and it shouldn't be too long of a wait.
Yeah, so I'm showing the Solid Central timeline. If you are not a Solid Central user, then and you don't spend time in here, or if you haven't logged in recently, you may not have seen the timeline. This is a feature that was released earlier this year. And you can see, for example, on November 19th, that Solid Security Basic was updated on one of the sites that are connected to this Solid Central account. This is a demo account. So it's got, you can see a lot of backups happening here. This is backups NextGen running, which is our cloud-based, cloud-first backup solution now that is running on most of the sites that are connected here. I'm scrolling back because I know that there was a time, I realized time flies. There was a time here where we had a few
You can add a
plugin
filter,
updates.
David.
I mean, I could, right? I could just look at the type of event. So we could say, hey, just show me any kind of software update. Very good. All right, so there we go. So on October 31st, we updated these plugins. But as the question asks, these updates only appear currently in the timeline if they originated from Central. If I actually, initiated the
Yeah, moving
update
over
from
to
here.
the software screen.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. But if instead had done something from WP admin, then that wouldn't appear here, nor would those things make their way into the reports. But Timothy, as you mentioned, that's something that's coming. And so I'd love to hear, are you using the timeline? Is anybody here using the timeline other than Edie? What do you like about the timeline? What would you like to see different about the timeline? I would love to hear about what you're thinking about that so far, and how that has been useful to you beyond just things like backups next gen. Of course, the backups appear there every time they run, so that's a powerful way to see where your backups fit in the context of other things that have happened. But that'll be even more powerful when we start showing events that took place that were not initiated from Solid Central, and include those things that originated from WordPress in the WordPress admin side. So that's an interesting question as well. Appreciate the question about Solid Central. And we have a question that's kind of related, actually. I won't read the entire question, but this came in from Paul, I believe is how you pronounce that, Paal, that just referred to the fact that, hey, I know that you've been doing work on this cloud-based backup solution, which is Backups Next Gen. But what about Backups Legacy? Which, by the way, if you are using the tool formerly known as Backup Buddy, or was previously referred to as Solid Backups, that got a new name last week, I believe it was.
Mm-hmm.
And it is now known as Solid Backups Legacy, which kind of helps underscore the fact that it is still a great tool. It's been around for a long time. It has a fantastic legacy, and it's not the tool of the future. So it is going to continue to receive support from Solid Backups and from the Solid team. But Timothy, do you want to comment a little bit about when it comes to Solid Backup's legacy? Obviously, there have been some changes made in 2024, but of course, we're not planning on releasing new features for Solid Backup's legacy. Do you want to comment a little bit on why someone who might be currently using Solid Backup's legacy might want to think about using Backups Next Gen instead as the tool of the future?
Yeah, and I think interestingly, Sue shared a great question that is a kind of reason why. Sue shared a question where she has a client that has a Plesk server. It's a whole complicated thing, and is getting an error message about crons not being available, and that causing backups to spit out error messages. And these kind of frustrations were some of the things that led us to build Solid Backups Next Gen. And the big thing with Solid Backups Next Gen is that it is all server driven. So our servers control, hey, we need to do a backup every so often. hey, we need to pace ourselves to fetch new files. And so it means that all we need is access to your actual WordPress server, and we can take care of all of the hard stuff for you. So if you've been struggling with some servers getting backups to work, NextGen Backups is